In the luxurious VIP room of Portland's upscale restaurant, two CEOs were seriously discussing business strategy. Market maps and financial charts spread across the gleaming mahogany table when suddenly the sound of breaking glass and commotion outside interrupted their conversation. "Why do you keep clutching that old beaten-up car like that? Are you mute or something?" The voice of the slightly older boy dripped with contempt toward the small boy being cornered against the wall, broken glass scattered on the floor. The little boy looked terrified, but didn't cry. The atmosphere shattered when a waitress rushed over, protectively embracing the small boy and saying, "That's enough. You're bullying him." The VIP room door opened. Jeremy Cross stepped out, seeing his son and the waitress facing this unexpected situation. His business partner's son ran to embrace his father, declaring, "She's bullying me, Dad!" Jeremy's instincts told him the waitress had done nothing wrong. But how would this story need to be resolved? The mahogany doors of the Grandview Bistro's most exclusive private dining room had witnessed countless high-stakes negotiations, but none quite like this one. Jeremy Cross sat across from Victor Blackwell, two titans of the tech industry whose combined net worth could fund small countries. Between them lay the blueprints for what would become the largest AI partnership in corporate history, a deal worth $800 million that would reshape how artificial intelligence integrated into everyday life. Jeremy's fingers drummed silently against the polished table as Victor outlined his vision for market dominance. The older man's voice carried the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no without immediately proving it wrong. Charts and projections covered every inch of the table's surface, each document representing months of research and preparation. This wasn't just business for Jeremy. It was his company's future, his employees' livelihoods, and perhaps most importantly, his 7-year-old son Theo's security. The fourth quarter projections show we'll capture 60% of the consumer market within 18 months. Victor continued, his silver hair catching the crystal chandelier's light. Your AI algorithms combined with my manufacturing infrastructure will create something unprecedented. He paused, fixing Jeremy with a penetrating stare. This is the kind of opportunity that defines careers, Jeremy. The kind that our children will read about in business school textbooks. The mention of children made Jeremy's thoughts drift momentarily to Theo, who sat quietly in the restaurant's main dining area with Preston, Victor's 10-year-old son. Jeremy had hesitated about bringing Theo today, but his regular babysitter had cancelled last minute, and leaving his son with strangers wasn't an option. Not anymore. Not since the accident 3 years ago that had stolen both Theo's mother and his voice, leaving Jeremy to navigate single parenthood while building an empire that demanded 18-hour days and cross-continental flights. Victor's presentation continued with military precision, each slide revealing deeper layers of market analysis and profit projections. The partnership would merge Jeremy's breakthrough in natural language processing with Victor's manufacturing capabilities, creating the first truly conversational AI assistant that could understand context, emotion, and nuance. It was revolutionary technology that would change how humans interacted with machines forever. The preliminary user testing shows engagement rates 3 times higher than existing platforms. Victor explained, pulling out a tablet displaying user interface mock-ups. Your emotional recognition algorithms don't just process words. They understand intent, frustration, joy, even sarcasm. Combined with our hardware, we're not just building a product, we're creating the future of human-computer interaction. Jeremy found himself genuinely impressed despite his usual skepticism. Victor's reputation for ruthless business practices was well documented, but his vision for this project aligned perfectly with Jeremy's own goals. The technology could help people like Theo, individuals who struggled with traditional communication methods. Perhaps voice-activated systems that understood non-verbal cues could bridge gaps that traditional interfaces couldn't. As Victor reached for his coffee cup, his expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something calculating crossing his features. Of course, we'll need to discuss market positioning carefully. My team has identified some concerning trends in your company's recent partnerships. Nothing that can't be managed, but we'll need to present a unified front to investors. The subtle threat was delivered with a smile, but Jeremy caught it nonetheless. The atmosphere in the room grew tenser as Victor outlined his concerns about Jeremy's company culture, specifically what he called excessive focus on employee welfare over profit maximization. Jeremy bristled at the implication, but maintained his composure. This was exactly the kind of corporate philosophy clash he'd expected from someone like Victor, whose companies were known for high turnover rates and aggressive cost-cutting measures. I believe treating employees well creates better products. Jeremy responded diplomatically, though his jaw tightened imperceptibly. Happy teams build better technology. Our retention rates speak for themselves. He gestured toward one of his own charts, showing employee satisfaction scores alongside productivity metrics. Innovation requires trust, not fear. Victor chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. Admirable sentiment, but sentiment doesn't drive stock prices. My shareholders expect results, not feel-good corporate policies. He leaned back in his leather chair, studying Jeremy with the confidence of a predator sizing up prey. That said, your results speak for themselves. We can work with different management styles as long as the bottom line remains our primary focus. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp crash from outside the private dining room, followed by raised voices that cut through the restaurant's typically serene atmosphere. Both men looked towards the door, their multi-million-dollar negotiation suddenly secondary to whatever commotion was unfolding beyond their mahogany fortress. Jeremy's paternal instincts kicked in immediately. The sound of distress triggered memories of hospital waiting rooms and silent car rides, of nights spent watching Theo sleep and wondering if his son would ever find his voice again. Without hesitation, he stood from his chair, Victor close behind, both men moving towards the source of the disturbance. The scene that greeted them in the main dining area would have been amusing under different circumstances. Near the restaurant's ornate marble columns, a small crowd of well-dressed patrons had gathered, their attention focused on what appeared to be a confrontation between restaurant staff and customers. Crystal stemware lay shattered on the Italian marble floor, reflecting the chandelier's light like scattered diamonds. At the center of the commotion stood a young woman in the restaurant's crisp black uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun that had somehow remained perfect despite the obvious chaos. She knelt beside a small figure, huddled against the marble column, her posture protective yet professional. Something in her demeanor suggested this wasn't her first encounter with a crisis situation, though the slight tremor in her hands betrayed emotions she was clearly working to control. The small figure she was protecting was unmistakably Theo, his favorite wooden toy car clutched tightly against his chest. The car had been a final gift from his mother, carved by hand during her last weeks in the hospital. Jeremy's heart clenched as he recognized the terror in his son's wide eyes, the same look that had haunted their home for 3 years. Theo's lips moved silently, forming words that never came, his small body trembling with the effort of trying to communicate something urgent. Standing over them both was Preston Blackwell, Victor's son, his face flushed with indignation and something else Jeremy couldn't quite identify. The boy's expensive clothing was pristine, except for what appeared to be juice stains on his white polo shirt, and his stance radiated the kind of entitled anger that Jeremy had seen too often in the children of the wealthy. "She attacked me," Preston declared loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear, pointing an accusatory finger at the waitress. "I was just trying to play with the weird kid and she grabbed me and started yelling." His voice carried the practiced victimization of a child who had learned that tears and accusations could solve most problems, especially when Daddy wrote the checks. The waitress remained calm despite the accusation, her attention focused entirely on Theo. She spoke to him in soft, measured tones that Jeremy couldn't quite hear, but could see having an immediate effect. Theo's breathing began to slow, his grip on the toy car loosening slightly. Whatever she was saying seemed to reach him in a way that months of expensive therapy had failed to achieve. "Mom, I'm going to need you to step away from the customers." The restaurant manager had arrived, his face pale with the realization that his establishment's reputation was hanging in the balance. "Mr. Blackwell is a valued patron, and if his son says—" The manager's voice trailed off as he noticed Jeremy's approach, recognizing another of the restaurant's most important clients. Victor moved past Jeremy with the swift decisiveness of a man accustomed to controlling situations. His transformation from business partner to protective father was immediate and absolute, his expensive suit somehow making him appear even more intimidating as he surveyed the scene. "Preston, what happened here?" His voice carried the authority of someone who expected immediate and complete answers. "Dad, that waitress lady grabbed me when I was just trying to be friends with him." Preston replied, his lower lip quivering with perfectly timed emotion. "She hurt my arm and scared me. I just wanted to see his toy car because it looked really old and broken." The boy's story flowed smoothly, each detail designed to paint himself as the innocent victim of an unprovoked attack. Jeremy studied the scene more carefully, his analytical mind processing details that others might miss. Theo's positioning against the column suggested he had been cornered, not engaged in friendly play. The broken glass lay in a pattern that indicated it had been thrown or knocked over during a struggle, not accidentally dropped. Most tellingly, Theo's expression was one of relief at the waitress's presence, not fear of an attacker. The waitress finally stood, her movements careful and measured. When she spoke, her voice carried a professional quality that seemed oddly familiar to Jeremy, though he couldn't place why. "I observed the situation and intervened when I saw a child in distress. My only concern was ensuring everyone's safety." Her words were chosen carefully, diplomatic yet firm. "Your concern should be serving food, not interfering with customers." Victor's voice cut through the restaurant's murmur like a blade. "My son was trying to make friends with yours, Jeremy, and your staff member turned it into an incident." He gestured broadly at the gathered crowd, his expression calculating the damage to both their reputations. The restaurant manager wrung his hands nervously, caught between two of his most valuable clients and a staff member he clearly wanted to protect. "Perhaps we could discuss this privately. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding that we can resolve without—" His diplomatic efforts were cut short by Victor's sharp gesture. "There's no misunderstanding. Your employee assaulted my child," Victor declared, his voice rising just enough to ensure the remaining diners could hear every word. "I want her fired immediately, and I want a written apology from this establishment. Otherwise, I'll be speaking with my attorneys about assault charges and my publicist about the kind of service one receives at supposedly fine dining establishments. Jeremy watched his son throughout Victor's tirade, noting how Theo seemed to shrink further into himself with each harsh word. The boy's silent communication was something Jeremy had learned to read over 3 painful years. Theo's eyes kept darting between the waitress and Preston, his expression clearly indicating that Preston's version of events wasn't accurate. The waitress remained remarkably composed, despite the threats being leveled against her. She knelt down again, this time addressing Theo directly. "Are you okay, sweetheart? Do you need anything?" Her voice carried a gentleness that penetrated Theo's defenses in a way that surprised Jeremy. His son actually nodded slightly, the first real communication he'd made all day. "She's manipulating him," Preston interjected quickly, perhaps sensing that his narrative was being challenged. "She's trying to make him lie for her. Dad, you have to do something before she hurts someone else." The boy's insistence felt rehearsed, as if he'd had practice deflecting attention from his own actions. Victor's expression hardened further as he addressed the restaurant manager. "I want her terminated immediately, or I'll ensure that every business publication in the city knows about this incident. Your establishment will be finished." The threat was delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had destroyed reputations for far less serious offenses. Jeremy found himself at a crossroads that would define not just the business deal, but his relationship with his son. Every instinct told him that the waitress was telling the truth, that Preston had been bullying Theo and was now using his father's influence to escape consequences. But calling out Victor's son would almost certainly kill the partnership deal, costing Jeremy's company hundreds of millions of dollars and potentially dozens of jobs. The entire restaurant had fallen silent, dozens of eyes watching to see how this drama would unfold. Jeremy could feel the weight of expectation, the assumption that business relationships would trump personal integrity. Victor stood confidently beside his son, already counting this as another victory in a life filled with successful intimidations. But as Jeremy looked at Theo, still clutching his mother's toy car and finding comfort in a stranger's kindness, he realized that some decisions were bigger than business deals. Some moments defined not just careers, but character. Not just profits, but principles. His son had lost his voice, but Jeremy still had his. "Victor," Jeremy said quietly, his voice carrying across the silent restaurant. "I've been watching this situation carefully, and I don't believe your son's version of events." The words hung in the air like a challenge, each syllable potentially worth millions of dollars. Victor's face flushed with surprise and anger. "Are you calling my son a liar?" The question was delivered with the dangerous quiet of a man who wasn't accustomed to being contradicted, especially in public. "I'm saying that my son's body language tells a different story," Jeremy replied calmly, moving to kneel beside Theo. "And I trust my son's judgment more than I trust anyone's words." He placed a gentle hand on Theo's shoulder, feeling the boy's tension begin to ease at his father's support. The waitress looked up at Jeremy with surprise, and something that might have been gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, though her voice carried undertones that suggested this moment meant more to her than simply keeping her job. Victor's expression shifted from anger to cold calculation. "I see. Well, Jeremy, I hope you understand that business partnerships require trust. If you can't trust my family's word, perhaps we shouldn't be working together at all." The threat was implicit but clear. Side with the waitress and lose the deal. Jeremy stood slowly, his decision crystallizing with each passing second. The mathematics were simple: $800 million versus doing what was right. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, words she'd spoken during his childhood about the difference between being successful and being significant. If choosing integrity over profit ends our partnership, then perhaps we weren't compatible partners to begin with, Jeremy said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was sacrificing. I won't build my son's future on the foundation of allowing him to be bullied. The restaurant erupted in whispered conversations as Victor's face went through a spectrum of emotions, from disbelief to rage to cold acceptance. Very well, he said finally, his voice tight with controlled fury. Preston, we're leaving. And Jeremy, you've just made the biggest mistake of your career. As the Blackwells gathered their belongings and stalked toward the exit, Jeremy felt a mixture of relief and terror. He'd just walked away from the largest deal in his company's history, potentially jeopardizing everything he'd built. But as he looked down at Theo, he saw something in his son's eyes that he hadn't seen in 3 years. Approval. The waitress stood slowly, her professional composure finally showing cracks. Sir, you didn't have to do that. I mean, thank you, but I know what that deal probably meant to your company. Her voice carried a weight of understanding that surprised Jeremy, as if she grasped the full implications of his choice. What's your name? Jeremy asked, studying her more closely. Something about her manner, her way of speaking to Theo, felt familiar in a way he couldn't quite identify. Hazel Brooks, she replied, unconsciously straightening her uniform. And I want you to know that your son showed remarkable courage today. Not all bravery involves words. The comment was directed at Theo, who looked up at her with something approaching wonder. Jeremy felt a chill of recognition. The name Hazel Brooks was familiar, though he couldn't immediately place where he'd heard it. Have we met before? Your voice, the way you handled Theo, it seems professional in a way that goes beyond restaurant service. His business instincts were telling him there was more to this woman than met the eye. Hazel's composure faltered slightly, a flicker of something fear. Guilt? Crossing her features. I just have experience with children. Some situations require a gentle touch. Her answer was carefully neutral, but Jeremy's trained eye caught the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her hands trembled almost imperceptibly. The restaurant manager approached cautiously, clearly relieved that the immediate crisis had passed, but uncertain about how to proceed. Ms. Brooks, perhaps you should take a few minutes to collect yourself. And sir? He addressed Jeremy. The house would like to comp your meal and extend our deepest apologies for this disruption. The meal is fine, but I'd like to speak with Ms. Brooks privately if possible. Jeremy replied, his curiosity about the waitress growing stronger. Theo seems comfortable with her, and that's not something that happens often. He looked down at his son, who was indeed sitting more relaxed than Jeremy had seen him in months. Hazel's reaction to this suggestion was immediate and telling. Her face went pale, and she took an involuntary step backward. That's very kind, but I should really get back to work. I have other tables to serve. Her voice carried the unmistakable tone of someone trying to escape a conversation, which only heightened Jeremy's interest. Please, Jeremy said gently, recognizing the signs of someone carrying a burden they didn't want to share. I'd like to understand what happened here today. And honestly, Theo's reaction to you is remarkable. He hasn't responded to anyone like this since his mother died. The admission came more easily than expected, perhaps because this stranger had already proven herself trustworthy. At the mention of Theo's mother, Hazel's expression softened, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine compassion. I'm sorry for your loss, she said quietly, and Jeremy could hear the sincerity in her voice. Losing a parent is traumatic for any child, but when they're already struggling to communicate... She trailed off, realizing she'd revealed more knowledge than a typical waitress might possess. "You speak like someone with professional experience," Jeremy observed, his analytical mind processing every word and gesture. "Child psychology, perhaps. Trauma counseling." He watched carefully for her reaction, noting how she tensed at each suggestion. Hazel glanced around the restaurant, clearly calculating whether she could escape this conversation gracefully. The dining room had mostly returned to normal, though several patrons were still stealing glances at their group. "I should really return to work," she repeated, but her tone lacked conviction. "Mom used to help people like me," Theo said suddenly, his small voice cutting through the adult conversation like a knife through silence. It was the first time he'd spoken in public in 3 years, and the shock of it left both adults staring at him in amazement. Jeremy dropped to his knees beside his son, his heart pounding with a mixture of joy and disbelief. "Theo, did you just speak?" His voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter this miraculous moment. Theo nodded, his eyes fixed on Hazel with an intensity that suggested recognition beyond their brief encounter. "She helps people like Mommy did. I can tell." The words came haltingly, as if he was remembering how to use his voice, but they were clear and purposeful. Hazel's face went white, and she sank into a nearby chair as if her legs could no longer support her. "Oh, God," she whispered, her professional composure completely abandoned. "He knows. Somehow he knows." Her voice carried a weight of guilt and recognition that confirmed Jeremy's growing suspicions. "Knows what?" Jeremy asked gently, dividing his attention between his suddenly verbal son and the clearly distressed woman who had somehow triggered this breakthrough. "Hazel, what does he know?" The use of her first name was intentional, an attempt to establish trust in a moment that felt incredibly fragile. Hazel looked around the restaurant again, but this time Jeremy recognized it as the behavior of someone checking for escape routes rather than concerned about appearances. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I used to be a child psychologist, specialized in trauma and selective mutism. I haven't practiced in 2 years. The confession came out in a rush, as if holding it back had become physically painful. The pieces began falling into place for Jeremy. The professional way she'd handled Theo's distress, her understanding of nonverbal communication, her immediate recognition of bullying behavior, it all made sense now. "What happened? Why did you stop practicing?" He kept his voice gentle, recognizing that he was dealing with someone carrying their own trauma. "I lost a patient," Hazel said simply, her voice hollow with remembered pain. "A 10-year-old boy named Alex Thompson. He'd been making progress, learning to trust again after years of abuse. But I missed something, some sign that he was planning to..." She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Jeremy felt his heart break for this woman who had clearly dedicated her life to helping children, only to have it end in the worst possible way. "It wasn't your fault," he said instinctively, though he knew the words would ring hollow to someone who'd probably heard them countless times. "I was supposed to protect him," Hazel continued, tears beginning to stream down her face. "I was supposed to see the signs, to know when a child was in danger. Instead, I failed him completely. His parents trusted me with their son's life, and I let him slip away." Her voice broke completely on the last words. Theo moved closer to Hazel, his small hand reaching out to touch her arm. "It's not your fault. he said with the simple clarity that only children possessed. Sometimes people hurt too much to stay. Mommy told me that before she went to heaven. His words carried a wisdom born from his own experience with loss and trauma. Jeremy watched this exchange with amazement, seeing his son show more emotional intelligence and compassion than many adults managed in their entire lives. "Theo's right," he said softly. "And you saved him today. You saw what was happening, and you acted to protect him. That's not the behavior of someone who's lost their calling." Hazel looked up at Jeremy through her tears, her expression a mixture of hope and disbelief. "But I'm just a waitress now. I couldn't face another child who might need help I couldn't provide. What if I failed again? What if I missed something important and another family suffered?" Her voice carried the weight of 2 years of self-doubt and guilt. "But you didn't miss anything today," Jeremy pointed out gently. "You saw exactly what was happening. You intervened at exactly the right moment, and you helped my son find his voice again. That doesn't sound like failure to me. That sounds like someone who was born to help children." He paused, studying her face. "Alex's death wasn't your fault, but walking away from helping other children because of it might be." The words hung in the air between them, harsh but necessary. Jeremy could see Hazel processing them, weighing her guilt against the possibility of redemption. Around them, the restaurant continued its elegant rhythm, but their small corner felt separate from the rest of the world. "I've been seeing other doctors," Theo said quietly, drawing both adults' attention back to him. "They're nice, but they don't understand. They want me to talk about scary things. You make the scary things feel smaller." His assessment was delivered with the brutal honesty of childhood, but it carried profound truth. Jeremy felt a surge of protective anger at his son's words. They'd tried 6 different therapists in 3 years, each promising breakthrough techniques and innovative approaches. But none had achieved in months what this woman had accomplished in minutes. "Would you consider seeing Theo professionally?" he asked, though he already suspected what her answer would be. "I can't," Hazel said immediately, panic flashing in her eyes. "I'm not licensed anymore. I let my credentials lapse after Alex. I couldn't face the review boards, the questions, the professional obligations. I just wanted to disappear." Her voice carried the exhaustion of someone who had been running from their past for too long. "Licenses can be renewed," Jeremy said practically. "Review boards can be faced. Professional obligations can be met. The question is whether you want to help children again, or whether you want to keep punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault." His business background had taught him to focus on solutions rather than problems. Hazel stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. "You don't understand." I held that boy's mother while she cried. I watched his father blame himself for not seeing the signs. I promised them I would help their son heal, and instead I failed so completely that he chose death over continuing to live with his pain. Her voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. "And how many children did you help before Alex?" Jeremy asked quietly. "How many families did you put back together? How many kids found their voices because of your work?" He stood as well, matching her intensity with calm determination. "You can't define your entire career by one tragic outcome." 47. Hazel said without hesitation. "I helped 47 children over 6 years before Alex. But none of that matters if I couldn't save the one who needed me most." Her precision in remembering the number told Jeremy everything he needed to know about how much her former patients had meant to her. "It all matters," Theo said suddenly, his young voice cutting through the adult conversation with startling clarity. 47 kids got better because of you. That's like way more than got hurt." His mathematical simplicity was devastating in its truth. Jeremy knelt beside his son, marveling at the wisdom emerging from this child who had been silent for so long. "Theo's right. And think about it this way, if you don't help children anymore, then Alex's death didn't just take him away from the world, it took you away too. That means his death caused even more damage than it had to." The logic was harsh but undeniable. Hazel sank back into her chair, the weight of this perspective clearly affecting her. "I never thought about it like that," she admitted quietly. "I was so focused on my failure that I didn't consider the consequences of giving up entirely." Her voice carried the first hint of hope Jeremy had heard from her. "What would it take for you to consider working with Theo?" Jeremy asked, sensing an opening. "Not immediately. Not until you're ready, but eventually. He's clearly responded to you in a way that months of other therapy couldn't achieve." He gestured toward his son, who was sitting more peacefully than Jeremy had seen him since before the accident. "I'd need to restore my license, complete continuing education requirements, probably undergo supervision for a period," Hazel said slowly, as if she was running through a mental checklist she'd considered before. "It would take months, maybe a year, and there's no guarantee the licensing board would approve my return given the circumstances of my departure. Money isn't an object." Jeremy said simply, "If you're willing to try, I can ensure you have whatever resources you need for the process. Education, supervision, legal support if necessary. Consider it an investment in my son's future." His offer was genuine, driven by both paternal desperation and recognition of Hazel's potential. Hazel looked between Jeremy and Theo, her expression cycling through emotions too complex to name. "Why would you do that?" "You barely know me. For all you know, I really am responsible for Alex's death. You'd be taking an enormous risk with your son's well-being based on a few minutes of interaction." Her voice carried genuine confusion at Jeremy's faith in her. "Because my son hasn't spoken in 3 years, and you got him talking in 10 minutes. Jeremy replied simply. "Because you stood up to bullying when it would have been easier to look away. Because 47 families trusted you with their children's mental health, and that kind of track record doesn't happen by accident." He paused, studying her face. "And because everyone deserves a second chance to do what they were born to do." Theo moved closer to Hazel again, his small presence somehow commanding attention from both adults. "Will you help me remember how to not be scared?" he asked, his voice carrying the vulnerability of a child who had lived with trauma for too long. "The other doctors want me to talk about the car crash, but talking about it makes the scared feeling bigger. You make it feel smaller without talking about scary things." Jeremy's breath caught at his son's revelation. Theo had never directly acknowledged the car accident before, had never put words to the trauma that had stolen his voice. The fact that he was not only speaking but articulating his therapeutic needs was nothing short of miraculous. Hazel's professional instincts seemed to kick in automatically. "The scared feeling isn't something we have to make bigger to make it go away," she told Theo gently. "Sometimes we can help it get smaller by building up all the other feelings around it. Happy feelings, safe feelings, strong feelings. Would you like to try that?" Her voice carried the natural authority of someone who had spent years helping children navigate emotional complexity. "Yes," Theo said immediately, his response so quick and decisive that both adults smiled, despite the gravity of the conversation. Can we start now? His eagerness was heartbreaking and hopeful in equal measure. Jeremy felt tears threatening as he watched his son engage with the possibility of healing in a way that years of expensive therapy had failed to achieve. "Hazel," he said softly, "I know this is asking a lot, but would you at least consider it? Not just for Theo, but for yourself, and for all the children you could help in the future." Hazel was quiet for several long minutes, her gaze moving between Jeremy's hopeful face and Theo's trusting expression. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady for the first time since the conversation began. "I'll need time to think about it. This isn't a decision I can make lightly. If I'm going to return to practice, I need to be certain I can handle the responsibility again." Her words were careful but not dismissive. "Of course," Jeremy said quickly. "Take all the time you need. And please, let me give you my contact information. Whether you decide to pursue your license or not, Theo and I would like to stay in touch. Today was important for both of us." He pulled out a business card, writing his personal cell number on the back. As Hazel accepted the card, Theo tugged on her uniform sleeve. "Are you going to keep being a waitress?" he asked with the directness that only children possessed. "Because you're really good at helping kids, and waitressing seems kind of boring for someone who's really good at helping kids." Hazel laughed despite herself, the first genuine smile Jeremy had seen from her. "You know what, Theo? You might be right about that." She looked up at Jeremy, something shifting in her expression. "I need to get back to work now, but I promise I'll think seriously about what you've said. Both of you have given me a lot to consider." Jeremy stood, helping Theo to his feet as well. "Thank you, Hazel. For protecting Theo, for helping him find his voice, and for considering using your gifts to help children again. Today could be the beginning of something really important." His voice carried the sincerity of someone who had just witnessed a minor miracle. As they prepared to leave, Theo turned back to Hazel one more time. "I hope you decide to help kids again," he said simply. "Because if you helped 47 kids before, maybe you could help 47 more. That would be 94 kids who got better because of you. That's a really big number." His mathematical logic was accompanied by a smile that lit up his entire face. Jeremy felt his heart swell with pride at his son's compassion and wisdom. The little boy who had been trapped in silence for 3 years was not only speaking again, but offering comfort to an adult who clearly needed it. "Come on, Theo," he said gently. "Let's let Miss Brooks get back to work, but I hope we'll see her again soon." As they walked toward the restaurant's exit, Jeremy couldn't help but marvel at how completely the day had changed. He'd entered the Grandview Bistro expecting to sign the largest business deal of his career. Instead, he was leaving with something far more valuable: hope for his son's healing and the knowledge that sometimes the most important decisions had nothing to do with money. The late afternoon sun streamed through the restaurant's tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor where broken glass had been carefully swept away. The physical evidence of the confrontation was gone, but the emotional impact would linger much longer. Jeremy knew that today marked a turning point, not just for Theo, but potentially for Hazel as well. "Dad," Theo said as they reached the car, his voice still carrying the wonder of rediscovered speech. "Do you think she'll decide to help kids again?" His question was loaded with hope, and the kind of innocent faith that children possessed before the world taught them to be cynical. Jeremy looked back at the restaurant, where Hazel was visible through the window, still standing where they'd left her, staring down at his business card. "I think she will, Theo. Sometimes people need to be reminded of who they really are, and I think today reminded her that she's someone who helps children heal." He opened the car door for his son, marveling at how natural conversation felt after 3 years of silence. As they drove through Portland's tree-lined streets, Theo peppered Jeremy with questions about Hazel, about therapy, about the possibility of getting better. Each word was a gift Jeremy had thought he might never receive again. The boy's curiosity was infectious, his excitement about the possibility of healing palpable in the small confines of their car. "Will she really be able to get her license back?" Theo asked, pressing his wooden toy car against the window as they passed a park where children were playing. The other doctors had lots of certificates on their walls. Does that mean they were better at helping than someone without certificates? Jeremy considered how to explain the complexities of professional licensing to a 7-year-old. Certificates are important because they show someone has studied and learned the right ways to help people. But having certificates doesn't automatically make someone good at helping, just like not having them doesn't mean someone can't help. Hazel lost her certificates, but she didn't lose her ability to understand and help children. Like how I lost my voice, but I didn't lose my words. Theo asked with the kind of insight that continued to astound his father. "They were always there, just stuck inside where I couldn't reach them." His analogy was surprisingly sophisticated for someone so young. "Exactly like that," Jeremy confirmed, feeling his throat tighten with emotion. "And just like Hazel helped you find your words again, maybe we can help her find her confidence to help children again." The parallel hadn't occurred to him before, but Theo's comparison was remarkably apt. That evening, as Jeremy tucked Theo into bed, his son's chatter finally beginning to wind down after hours of nearly non-stop conversation, he reflected on the day's events. The loss of the Blackwell deal would have significant financial implications for his company, but sitting in his son's room listening to bedtime stories told in a voice he'd thought was gone forever, Jeremy knew he'd made the right choice. "Dad?" Theo's voice was sleepy, but still carried the wonder of rediscovered speech. "Tomorrow can we call Hazel and see if she's decided about helping kids again?" His persistence was endearing, though Jeremy suspected it might take considerably longer than one night for Hazel to make such a life-changing decision. "We'll give her some time to think about it, buddy. Ooh. Deciding to go back to a job that made you sad is a big choice for grown-ups. But yes, we'll check in with her soon." Jeremy smoothed Theo's hair, still amazed that his son was speaking after years of silence. "I think she will," Theo said with the certainty that children brought to their predictions about the adult world. "Because she looked at me the same way Mommy used to when I was scared. Like she could see the scared feeling and wanted to make it smaller." His comparison to his deceased mother was both heartbreaking and hopeful. 3 days later, Jeremy's phone rang while he was in a morning meeting with his senior staff, discussing how to restructure their expansion plans in light of the lost Blackwell partnership. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, but something prompted him to excuse himself and take the call. "Mr. Cross? This is Hazel Brooks, from the restaurant." Her voice was steadier than it had been during their emotional conversation, but Jeremy could still detect underlying nervousness. "I've been thinking about what you and Theo said, and I'd like to talk about the possibility of working with him, if the offer is still open." Jeremy felt his heart rate spike with hope and excitement. "Of course it's still open. Have you made a decision about pursuing your license renewal?" He stepped into his private office, closing the door to ensure privacy for what he sensed would be an important conversation. "I've started the process," Hazel said, and Jeremy could hear papers rustling in the background. "I contacted the licensing board yesterday and requested information about reinstatement procedures. It's going to be complicated and expensive, but it's possible. They'll require additional education, supervision, and a review of the circumstances surrounding my departure from practice." "Whatever you need," Jeremy said immediately. "Financial support, legal assistance, character references, whatever it takes to help you through the process. Theo hasn't stopped talking about you since we left the restaurant. He's convinced you're going to help him get completely better." His offer was sincere, driven by both gratitude and genuine belief in Hazel's abilities. "About that," Hazel said, her voice taking on a more professional tone, "I want to be clear about expectations. Selective mutism, especially trauma-related selective mutism, can be very complex to treat. The fact that Theo spoke at the restaurant is encouraging, but it doesn't guarantee continued progress. There may be setbacks, and the process could take months or even years." Jeremy appreciated her honesty, even as his heart sank slightly at the realistic timeline she was outlining. "I understand. We've been dealing with this for 3 years already. What matters is that you've already accomplished more in one conversation than 6 other therapists managed in months of sessions. We're willing to be patient if you're willing to try." "There's something else," Hazel continued, and Jeremy could hear the weight of whatever she was about to share. "Part of the licensing review process will involve a thorough examination of Alex Thompson's case. There may be publicity, questions about my competence, speculation about my fitness to practice. If you're associated with me professionally, that scrutiny could extend to you and Theo. I want you to understand the risks." Jeremy had already considered this possibility, but he appreciated Hazel's transparency about the potential consequences. "My company has weathered public relations challenges before, and honestly, after what I witnessed at the restaurant, I'm more concerned about Theo missing the chance to work with someone who understands him than I am about media speculation." "All right then," Hazel said, and Jeremy could hear resolve strengthening in her voice. "I'm going to need about 6 months to complete the license renewal process. In the meantime, would you be interested in having Theo participate in some informal sessions? Nothing that could be considered official therapy, just opportunities for him to practice communication in a safe environment." "Yes," Jeremy said without hesitation. "Whatever you think would be helpful. Theo's been asking about you every day since we met. I think regular contact would be beneficial for both of you." He paused, struck by a thought. "Are you still working at the restaurant?" "Because I'd be happy to arrange alternative employment if you'd prefer to focus on your licensing renewal." "Actually, I gave my notice yesterday," Hazel replied, and Jeremy could hear a smile in her voice. "It turns out that once you remember who you really are, serving overpriced pasta to wealthy people loses its appeal. I'm going to be spending the next few months studying for my renewal exams and completing continuing education requirements." Over the following weeks, Jeremy watched in amazement as his son continued to blossom under Hazel's unofficial guidance. They met twice a week at various child-friendly locations around Portland, parks, museums, libraries, where Hazel would engage Theo in activities designed to build his confidence and communication skills without the pressure of formal therapy. Theo's progress was remarkable, but not linear. Some days he chattered non-stop about everything he saw and experienced. Other days he retreated into periods of silence, processing emotions and memories at his own pace. But even on the quiet days, there was a fundamental difference in his demeanor. The crushing anxiety that had characterized his behavior for 3 years was gradually lifting, replaced by a cautious but growing sense of security. He's learning to trust his own voice again. Hazel explained to Jeremy after a particularly successful session at the Children's Science Museum. Trauma doesn't just steal the ability to speak, it steals the belief that speaking is safe, that words matter, that communication leads to connection rather than pain. We're rebuilding that belief, one conversation at a time. Jeremy found himself looking forward to these informal sessions almost as much as Theo did. Watching Hazel work was like observing an artist who had rediscovered her medium. Her intuitive understanding of child psychology, combined with a gentleness born from her own experience with loss, created an environment where healing felt natural rather than forced. "Dad, do you think Hazel is getting better too?" Theo asked one evening as they drove home from a session at the zoo, where he'd spent an hour excitedly describing the animals to anyone who would listen. "She seems less sad than when we first met her." Jeremy glanced in the rearview mirror at his son, continually amazed by the boy's emotional intelligence. "I think she is getting better, Theo. Sometimes helping other people helps us heal, too. You're probably helping her remember why she became a therapist in the first place." "Good," Theo said with satisfaction, "because if she helps me and I help her, then we're both getting better together. That's better than just one person getting better by themselves." His logic was simple, but profound. 5 months after their first meeting, Hazel called Jeremy with news that would change all their lives. "I passed my licensing review," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and excitement. "The board approved my return to practice with 6 months of supervision. I can officially be Theo's therapist now." Jeremy felt tears of gratitude and relief. "Congratulations, Hazel. You've worked incredibly hard for this. How do you feel about officially returning to practice?" He knew this moment represented not just professional reinstatement, but personal redemption for someone who had spent 2 years believing she wasn't worthy of helping children. Terrified and excited in equal measure, Hazel admitted honestly. "But Theo has shown me that I can still make a difference. His progress has given me back my confidence. I'm ready to help other children too." Her voice carried the authority and compassion that Jeremy had recognized from their first meeting. The transformation in both Theo and Hazel over the following year was nothing short of remarkable. Theo's selective mutism gradually resolved as he learned to trust his voice and his environment again. He returned to school, made friends, and began processing his mother's death in healthy ways that honored her memory while allowing him to move forward. Hazel rebuilt her practice slowly and carefully, taking on cases that challenged her skills while honoring the lessons she'd learned from her experience with Alex Thompson. She never forgot the boy she hadn't been able to save, but she no longer allowed his death to prevent her from helping the children she could save. "You know what I've learned?" Hazel said to Jeremy during one of their regular check-ins, watching Theo play with other children in her office waiting room. "Sometimes our greatest failures prepare us for our most important successes. I'm a better therapist now because I understand how fragile the work is, how precious each breakthrough moment can be." Jeremy nodded, understanding completely. "And sometimes the choices that seem like failures in the moment turn out to be the most important decisions we ever make. Walking away from that business deal was the best thing I ever did for my son." He paused, watching Theo laugh with uninhibited joy. "For both of us, really." 2 years after their dramatic first meeting at the Grandview Bistro, Jeremy found himself back at the same restaurant, this time for a celebration dinner. Theo sat across from him, animated and talkative, describing his day at school with the enthusiasm of a child who had learned to trust that his words would be heard and valued. "Can we invite Hazel to come with us next time?" Theo asked as they finished their dessert. "I want to show her where we first met." She might not even remember, since she was just a waitress then and didn't know she was going to be my doctor. His suggestion was made with the casual affection of someone who considered Hazel family. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Jeremy agreed, marveling at how far they'd all come. The frightened, silent child who had cowered behind marble columns was gone, replaced by a confident, articulate boy who advocated for others and maintained relationships with genuine care. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Jeremy reflected on the unexpected ways that life could change in a single moment. A business meeting that had seemed crucial to his company's future had ultimately been irrelevant. The real transformation had come from a moment of moral clarity, a decision to protect the vulnerable rather than pursue profit. "Dad," Theo said as they walked to their car, his voice carrying the thoughtful tone that often preceded his most insightful observations. "Do you think that mean Kid Preston ever learned to be nicer to people?" His question showed both maturity and compassion, wondering about even those who had hurt him. Jeremy considered how to answer honestly while maintaining his son's faith in people's capacity for change. "I don't know, Theo. But I hope he did. Sometimes people are mean because they're hurting inside, just like how you were quiet because you were hurting. Maybe he found someone to help him learn better ways to handle his feelings." "I hope so, too," Theo said simply, because being mean probably made him feel bad inside, even if he didn't show it. Everyone deserves to feel better. His capacity for empathy, despite having been bullied, demonstrated the kind of emotional growth that Hazel had made possible. That night, as Jeremy tucked Theo into bed, his son's voice filled their home with stories and questions and plans for tomorrow. He felt overwhelming gratitude for the waitress who had seen a child in distress and chosen to act. Hazel's moment of courage had saved not just Theo, but potentially dozens of other children who would benefit from her restored practice. "You know what, Dad?" Theo said sleepily, his wooden toy car resting on the nightstand, where it had held a place of honor since his mother's death. "I think Mommy would be really proud of how we helped Hazel remember she was good at helping kids. Mommy always said the best way to feel better was to help someone else feel better." Jeremy's throat tightened with emotion at his son's wisdom and the gentle way he kept his mother's memory alive. "I think you're absolutely right, Theo. Mommy would be very proud of both of us." He kissed his son's forehead, listening to the contented breathing of a child who had learned to trust the world again. In the months that followed, Jeremy often thought about the butterfly effect of that single decision at the Grandview Bistro. By choosing integrity over profit, by trusting his instincts about a waitress who seemed more than she appeared, he had set in motion a chain of events that transformed multiple lives. Hazel returned to her calling stronger and more compassionate than before. Theo found his voice and his confidence. And Jeremy learned that the most important business deals weren't measured in dollars, but in human connections and moral courage. The story of the billionaire CEO who caught a waitress protecting his special son became more than a dramatic moment. It became a testament to the power of second chances, the importance of standing up for the vulnerable, and the remarkable healing that could occur when people chose compassion over convenience. Sometimes the most significant reactions weren't the loud, dramatic gestures, but the quiet decision to do what was right, even when it cost everything you thought you wanted